In the late 1930s, Germany saw the rise of a new miracle drug. Temmler-Werke, a Berlin-based pharmaceutical company, developed a stimulant called Pervitin. It hit the market in 1938 as a small white tablet. At first glance, it seemed harmless, but inside was methamphetamine hydrochloride, essentially crystal meth. Pervitin quickly gained popularity. Housewives used it to stay energized. Students used it to study. Workers relied on it to push through exhaustion. It didn't require a prescription. Ads promised alertness, confidence, and weight loss. Newspapers called it a miracle pill. Doctors saw it as modern medicine's answer to fatigue. It was sold like candy in German pharmacies. People loved how it erased tiredness, but there was more beneath the surface. Pervitin wasn't just boosting moods, it was reshaping behavior. The drug blurred the line between energy and mania, and soon the military took notice. That's when everything changed. This wasn't just a lifestyle drug anymore. It was about to become a weapon, one that could turn men into machines, and the consequences would be deadly. By 1939, the German military began testing Pervitin on its soldiers. The results were dramatic. Troops stayed awake for days. They marched over 50 kilometers without rest. They fought harder and longer. They felt fearless, focused, and unstoppable. The Wehrmacht saw potential and moved fast. Pervitin became standard issue for troops. Millions of tablets were produced. Soldiers called them Stuka pills, or tank chocolate. Sometimes the drug was mixed into candy to make it easier to take. In April 1940, as Germany prepared to invade France, 35 million pills were distributed. Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, depended on speed and surprise. Pervitin helped deliver both. Tank crews stayed awake for 72 hours straight. Pilots flew long missions while high. Infantry marched through forests, snow, and mud without sleeping. Meth dulled pain and erased fear. Commanders were instructed to dose their men as needed. Some even gave extra pills during combat. One officer famously said, "Our secret weapon isn't a tank, it's a pill." That pill changed the battlefield and minds. The drug helped make fast victories seem effortless. But what seemed like an advantage came with a cost. Underneath the steel of discipline, men were unraveling. The real crash hadn't even begun. After the initial high from Pervitin, Nazi soldiers experienced severe crashes. Once the drug wore off, exhaustion hit like a wall. Many became dizzy, weak, and disoriented. Some collapsed in the middle of missions, unable to move. Others suffered from intense paranoia. There were reports of hallucinations on the battlefield. Soldiers imagined enemies surrounding them when no one was there. One soldier thought the trees were whispering secrets. Another shot at empty air, convinced he was under attack. These weren't isolated cases. Entire units had to be pulled from combat because the men were no longer functional. Early military reports began documenting these effects by late 1940. Symptoms included insomnia, anxiety, psychosis, and extreme aggression. Despite this, the Army continued to distribute Pervitin widely. The drug had proven effective in battle, and short-term gains mattered more than long-term health. But the consequences deepened. Soldiers became dependent. They demanded more pills before every mission. In some cases, they refused to fight without them. Pervitin wasn't just altering bodies, it was reshaping minds. Nowhere was this more disturbing than in the SS. Many officers combined meth with morphine, creating a toxic cocktail. Meth heightened alertness and aggression. Morphine numbed empathy and emotion. Together, they produced cold, robotic killers. These men carried out atrocities with mechanical cruelty. They didn't hesitate, didn't question. They were high, and they were deadly. The SS, Hitler's most loyal and brutal force, embraced Pervitin with terrifying enthusiasm. Unlike regular soldiers, many SS officers weren't just users, they were addicts. They took high doses regularly, often combining meth with morphine and alcohol. This cocktail turned them into unpredictable, dangerous figures. Some guards were seen shaking, sweating, and muttering to themselves, deep in drug-induced psychosis. Others acted with hyper-focused violence, beating prisoners without provocation or remorse. In concentration camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek, meth was not only used by guards, it was tested on inmates. Nazi doctors such as Karl Klauberg and Eduard Wirtz ran experiments to measure how long prisoners could survive without sleep, food, or warmth while on meth. In Dachau, some victims were injected with meth before being subjected to freezing temperatures. Others were starved and monitored to see if the drug extended survival. Most of them died in agony. These experiments weren't science. They were torture disguised as research. The SS believed meth made their troops colder, tougher, and less human. The goal wasn't just to enhance performance, it was to erase compassion. Eyewitnesses described guards with wild eyes, unblinking stares, and expressions devoid of emotion. One officer reportedly killed a prisoner with his bare hands during a hallucination, screaming that the victim was a traitor. Such incidents weren't rare. Drug use in the SS escalated until even high command became alarmed. Reports describe many officers as erratic, unstable, and prone to violent outbursts. Some couldn't distinguish reality from delusion. And yet, the regime continued its drug programs because the destruction they enabled served the Nazi agenda. While Nazi soldiers were fueled by Pervitin on the front lines, Adolf Hitler was descending into his own world of pharmaceutical dependence. His personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, administered a wide array of substances to him daily. These included stimulants, tranquilizers, hormones, opioids, and even bizarre tonics made from animal extracts. Hitler reportedly believed these injections were essential to his energy and focus. Among the drugs he received were Eucadol, a powerful opioid similar to oxycodone, and Pervitin itself. Morell also gave him cocaine-based treatments for nasal problems and barbiturates to calm him at night. Hitler's drug routine was so extensive that he was said to have received over 80 different medications between 1941 and 1945. As the war turned against Germany, his dependence grew. His health visibly deteriorated, he developed tremors, his posture weakened, and he appeared increasingly pale and gaunt. Footage shows his left hand trembling uncontrollably, often hidden behind his back. His speech became erratic, his mood swung between rage and euphoria, and his decision-making grew increasingly irrational. Generals noted that he dismissed military advice and clung to fantasies of secret weapons and last-minute victories. Some historians believe that his drug use played a significant role in these delusions. He became more paranoid, convinced of betrayal everywhere. He isolated himself in the Führer bunker, relying entirely on Morell's injections. Even as Berlin crumbled, Hitler continued his daily regimen. By the final weeks, he was physically and mentally wrecked, barely able to function. When he died by suicide in April 1945, he was a shadow of the man who had once commanded Europe. His decline mirrored the collapse of the regime he led into disaster. As Nazi Germany faced total collapse in 1945, its leadership spiraled into chaos, fear, and heavy drug use. Inside Hitler's bunker, the atmosphere was surreal. Leaders clung to fantasies while the Allies closed in from all sides. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, was relying on sleeping pills to function. He remained fanatically loyal, delivering delusional speeches about final victory, even as defeat was imminent. At the same time, he and his wife were preparing to poison their 6 children and themselves. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, was taking stimulants to stay awake and manage his crumbling empire. By then, he was secretly trying to negotiate with the Allies, realizing the war was lost. Others in Hitler's inner circle were turning on each other, fueled by paranoia and drugs. Military coordination broke down. Some tried to flee, while others stayed, trapped by loyalty or fear. Methamphetamine had long since spread beyond soldiers to officers and staff. The SS, already notorious for their brutality, were now known among medical staff for erratic, sometimes psychotic behavior. Some guards were removed from duty after becoming too unstable to follow orders. Reports surfaced of hallucinations, violent outbursts, and complete psychological breakdowns. These were men operating death camps, now detached from all reality. Drugs didn't create their ideology, but they may have enabled its most horrifying acts. By removing fear, fatigue, and empathy, meth allowed longer cruelty. Even when defeat was obvious, Nazi leaders kept going, not with reason but with chemicals. Their world burned, but they remained numb, aggressive, and deluded. The final days of the Third Reich were soaked not just in blood but in pharmaceuticals. When it all ended, few were sober, physically or morally. The story of Nazi drug use is more than a disturbing historical footnote. It's a warning. It shows what happens when power, ideology, and science collide without ethics. The Nazi regime used drugs not for healing, but for domination, violence, and control. Methamphetamine didn't cause World War II, but it helped fuel it, making soldiers more aggressive, more tireless, and more detached from humanity. It blurred the line between man and machine, replacing fear and empathy with focus and cruelty. In the SS, the effects were amplified, contributing to the most brutal atrocities of the war. These weren't isolated cases. Millions of Pervitin tablets were distributed, not just in combat, but deep within the Nazi power structure. Even Hitler himself was addicted to a cocktail of meth, opioids, and other drugs that warped his perception and decision-making. As his mind deteriorated, so did the last hopes of rational command. The final months of the Third Reich were driven by delusion, denial, and dependency. This was not a regime in control. It was unraveling from the inside, chemically and morally. After the war, many of these drugs didn't disappear. Some evolved into medications still used today, a haunting reminder of their origins. And some of the scientists behind the Nazi drug programs were quietly absorbed into Cold War research by the Allies. History, as always, is complicated, but the legacy of Nazi meth use is clear. It was a tool of a brutal machine, and it made that machine more relentless. It's a chilling example of how science without conscience becomes a weapon. Let us not forget how easily ordinary people under pressure and ideology can be transformed. What do you think? Were drugs a key factor in the Nazis' ability to commit such atrocities? Let us know in the comments below. Leave a like if you found this eye-opening, and subscribe for more untold stories from history.